I thought I had this amazing idea. I was going to be the first perfect score student to write an SAT prep book to teach students how I studied for the test. And I thought book publishers would love it, literary agents would love it. And self-publishing wasn't really a big thing back then. So if you really wanted to sell books, you had to go through a major publisher. And so I pitched this idea out to over 100 literary agents and publishers. Every single agent or publisher said no. So this was like a huge bump in my road. It totally discouraged me. Um, and what I ended up, I actually had publishers who said, the SAT prep market's too competitive. You don't have a platform to write the book. I even had one publisher said, he's not a good writer. I don't care what his score is.
My guest on this podcast is Shaan Patel. In preparing for college, Shawn initially had an average score in his SAT. He hunkered down and studied. He went from average to a perfect 1600. Only 0.02% of people achieve a perfect score. That experience led Shawn to write a book and to start a business to help others improve their scores. His business is PrepExpert. PrepExpert led Shawn to Shark Tank, where he landed a deal with Mark Cuban, and his business took off. To date, he's helped students earn over $100 million in scholarships. Please welcome Shaan Patel to Bump in the Road. Shawn, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi, Pat. So my name's Shaan Patel, and I'm the founder and CEO of PrepExpert. It's a online test preparation company. So we do SAT and ACT courses, college admissions consulting, as well as one-on-one tutoring. My claim to fame is I took it on Shark Tank a few years ago, pitched it for a deal, and made an investment with Mark Cuban, who's been an amazing investor, advocate, and partner for the company ever since. In addition to that, my educational background, I got so my story is pretty interesting actually in terms of how I got here. Would you like me to go into it now or wait a little bit?
Oh, yeah, no, go into it because it really is a very interesting and unexpected path. I mean, from where you started to Shark Tank is quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah. My story, I never planned to start a test prep company. And the way that it all happened, it actually starts back in my own high school years, in which I attended urban public schools in Las Vegas, Nevada. I grew up in my parents' budget motel. And, I didn't know the first thing about test preparation, college admissions, scholarships. My parents didn't go to school in the United States. And so, I think that for me, I was a very good student, but I was not a very good standardized test taker. I had a lot of test anxiety. I had no idea how to start prepping for these tests. And so, on the very first SAT I ever took, I barely scored above average. And so what I did then was I spent hundreds of hours in the library studying for the SAT. Eventually, I was able to raise my score 640 points to a perfect score, which is something that only 0.02% of all students achieve. That perfect score then led me to some amazing things, including admission into top universities, $500,000 in college scholarship offers, and even the opportunity to meet the president. And so when I got to college, I wanted to help other students improve their test scores. And so eventually, and I say eventually because I did hit a bump in the road, I started Prep Expert, and the rest is history. Over the past 13 years, we've helped over 100,000 students improve their SAT and ACT scores, get into top colleges. But what I'm most proud about is helping students win over $100 million in college scholarships to
Mm,
reduce or eliminate their college costs and student debt.
that's an amazing number.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, but it's my favorite part is getting those emails. My kid just got $500,000 in scholarships, a quarter million, 100,000, because that's really life changing.
Oh, it's totally life-changing, as is being on Shark Tank. What was that process like, applying and actually getting on, and what was the behind the scenes experience like compared to the actual filming?
Yeah, so applying and being on Shark Tank was a pretty interesting experience because I auditioned for the show back in 2015. So this was kind of peak Shark Tank. I would say they were getting their highest viewership ever. So it was a very competitive process. I believe the year that I applied, 2015, there was about 50,000 applications, and out of the 50,000 applications, only about 150 made it onto the show. And so it was basically as hard as getting a perfect SAT score to get on the show. But what was interesting about my audition was, I stood in line with 500 people for the New York City audition, and I was one of the last people in line, so I had to wait like 8 hours. And finally, when I got to pitch the casting call producer to give him a 1-minute pitch, I saw that he was totally uninterested. Maybe he was tired from the day. Everything I said, like I have $1 million in sales, I've been in the New York Times, I'm totally unimpressed until the very last moment when I pulled my book out from behind me, my SAT prep book, and he was totally impressed. His eyes lit up. He asked if he could have the book for his nephew. And it really, what I learned from that experience was writing a book can really, really give you the authority and the expertise to take on all kinds of new avenues that you would have never thought was possible. Because I think if I didn't have that book, I probably wouldn't have ever been on Shark Tank. And then to answer your question on the behind the scenes experience, that was also very interesting. A lot of people think Shark Tank is scripted, totally not scripted, very nerve-wracking. I was actually in the tank for about 90 minutes pitching the sharks, answering every question under the sun about business, sales, marketing, etc. And then the producers, of course, edit out the top 10 or 15 minutes that are
Mhm.
most interesting, most engaging, and most dramatic for the audience. So if you watch my Shark Tank episode, it looks like I'm sweating in 10 minutes, but that's because I was there for 90 minutes. Um, but everything is very real. They don't scripted. They never yelled cut once. Even the deal that I made, I did a handshake deal with Mark Cuban on the show that actually went through the due diligence process, and we closed the investment deal. I'd say only about 50% of entrepreneurs you see on the show actually end up closing the investment after, because a lot of times many entrepreneurs are not able to make it through the due diligence process. Either they lied about their sales, or something's funky about their business, registration or ownership or something like that. So what was nice is we got through the due diligence, we made the deal just like it showed on the show.
One of the things I love about your story, you wrote this in your book. As you can imagine, I was pretty discouraged at this point. So I had two options. Plan A was to continue to hope for a book publishing deal. Plan B was to quit. But when life gives you two options, create a third.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta create plan C. So, to give your audience some context on this point in my life, this is kinda one of the biggest bumps in the road that I ran into with PrepExpert, which was, as I mentioned, I didn't really wanna start a test prep company when I was in college. What I really wanted to do was I just wanted to write an SAT prep book. And, you know, this was back in, 2010-ish. Yeah, 2010. Those was my last junior and senior years of college. And so I thought I had this amazing idea. I was gonna be the first perfect score student to write an SAT prep book to teach students how I studied for the test. And I thought book publishers would love it, literary agents would love it. And self-publishing wasn't really a big thing back then. So if you really wanted to sell books, you had to go through a major publisher. And so I pitched this idea out to over 100 literary agents and publishers. Every single agent or publisher said no. So this was like a huge bump in my road. It totally discouraged me. And what I ended up, I actually had publishers who said, the SAT prep market's too competitive. You don't have a platform to write the book. I even had one publisher said, "He's not a good writer. I don't care what his score is." I mean, that one was kind of mean. But, everyone was rejecting me at that time. And so or rejecting my book proposal. And so what I think what you just said out of my book, what I'm talking about is plan A, plan B. I kind of had plan A or plan B. It was like plan A was write the book. Plan B was, forget writing the book. I was going to go to medical school anyway, and no big deal. But when life gives you two plans, I thought of plan C. And the plan C was, well, I've already spent hundreds of hours writing all this curriculum, writing all of this manuscript for the book. Why don't I just take all that curriculum, this book, and turn it into a course? And so that's what I did. I basically turned it into a course and I started Prep Expert. It was called 2400 Expert at the time, but Prep Expert essentially. And in the summer between my senior year of college and medical school, I taught my first 6-week SAT prep course. And what was amazing about that course is I only had, I think, I had 8 students in one class and 10 in another. So I had 18 students total. But over the course of 6 weeks, those 18 students had an average score improvement of 376 points to their
My
scores.
gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So for those that know the scoring scale of the SAT, it's out of 1600. And so that was equivalent of taking a student who was in the 50th percentile, basically average, and then putting them in the 90th percentile, putting them in the top 10%. So it totally opened up their college opportunities, their scholarship opportunities, and made them more serious about academics and studying. And so, of course, I had parents and students who wanted more courses, so I began training other instructors to teach my curriculum. But what was really interesting is about a year later, McGraw-Hill, the world's largest education publisher, saw what I was building with PrepExpert in my courses and decided to give me a book deal after all. And so we wrote the book. We, they were like, "Oh, you have a platform now, so we should write the book." So I wrote it, and then we put it on Amazon, and it went number one on Amazon for SAT prep. It sold over 50,000 copies, and it's been pretty amazing experience that everyone told me it wasn't going to work, and when I took another path, it ended up working out just fantastic. So that was pretty interesting.
I think having taking another path is really key in life. Years ago, somebody said to me, "If you can only come up with two options, you're thinking in black and white. Don't make a decision
Mm.
until you can generate at least a third option." And I think that's been really good advice because there are always lots of options. You don't necessarily know where they'll lead, but I think part of the key is just to have forward momentum.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of piece of advice for people is don't think in black and white terms. And the way that I think about it is there's usually gray area. Like that's what
Oh
people call
yeah.
the gray area, right? So you have to be able to navigate that, be creative. I think that's one of the marks of someone who's resilient. And being resilient is the hallmark of being a great entrepreneur and oftentimes is successful in life even. It's just how you respond to failures. I think it was a Winston Churchill, or I think said, the success is marked by how enthusiastic you go from failure to failure. That's totally true.
I just started reading a book called Grit, which was a New York Times bestseller. And the author's a psychologist, and she makes the argument. I've just started reading it, but she basically makes the argument that even with great test scores and everything else, the key to success is really grit, as she calls it, a combination of perseverance, flexibility, not giving up, just keep moving. And I see that in so many of my guests that that grit factor is really key. What 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 do you think outside the SAT accounts for the success of the students who really nail it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because I was teaching a class yesterday and the students were like, "Oh, my score is not improving after 2 weeks." And I kind of described what you just said. I said it's probably not going to uh, improve in 2 weeks. You've only been doing it for 2 weeks. You have to keep going, and maybe in week three it'll start improving. Maybe week four, maybe week five. It will take some time, but you have to be enthusiastic. You have to keep going. You have to be flexible. But the problem I think that I see not only today's students but today's society is that everyone is looking for immediate results and immediate gratification. And the reason for that, a lot of times, is because of social media. Social media is like you post a photo, you expect likes on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, whatever it would be. It's instant gratification. Or you open up your feed, even if you don't post, and you expect to see great content. Instant gratification. And so I think the art of perseverance, grit, everything you talked about is lost on us because we're so used to instant gratification. So we have to train ourselves to get back to I'm going to be patient. I'm going to fail. This isn't going to be immediately gratifying. In fact, it's not going to be gratifying for a very, very long time. Um, but when it is gratifying, I think that it's going to be much better, sweeter. Everything's going to be there. And if you could be enthusiastic in that way, I think you can be assured success. As it sounds like, um, is it Angela Duckworth? That's the
Yes.
author of
Yeah.
Grit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she describes this in her book.
Yeah, it's so far a very interesting read. One of the places in society still where you have to persevere is sports. I mean,
Mm.
sports is a great um, metaphor for so many things in life. How many
Oh,
kids do
yeah.
you think are involved in sports these days?
Oh, I mean, I would say tons of high achievers are involved in sports, and the reason for that is all of the same skills that you need to succeed on a difficult exam like the SAT or the ACT, which is time management,
Mhm.
which is perseverance, which is flexibility, which is practicing and working hard. Those are all the same skills you need to be successful at sports, but also in most other aspects of life, right? Like even in your career or things like that. So what I try to do with students is whether they're in sports or whether they're in my classes is I try to teach them these skills. Even though I'm a SAT prep course, what's really interesting about our courses and our books is I try to teach them general life skills around time management, productivity, how to study, because these skills are interestingly not taught in most high schools. And so we need to teach our students this so that they don't have to learn it the hard way. Now, some people will still, but um, if you can be taught by people with experience in any discipline, I think you have a huge advantage because you can learn from their experience. And that's what I try to do for students in our courses and books.
Yeah, I think learning from other people's experience is definitely a shortcut if you can pause
Mhm.
enough to try to absorb that kind of wisdom. What sort of wisdom has Mark Cuban brought to your business?
Oh, so much. I mean, Mark's been incredible in being an advisor, but also just leading by example from how to operate a business. So, one is he's always advised me to really invest in my people. And I think, every company Mark's ever sold, and he sold many for, I think, his big one was broadcast.com for billions. He's turned people into millionaires and he really takes care of his employees. And what I find as an entrepreneur is I'm learning from that in that when I first started with Mark, I had a lot of employee turnover. I had a lot of people leaving. I had to fire people. And it's because I wasn't hiring the right employees at the time. And, Mark kind of one time just asked me, what's going on over there? And that's when I brought in a business coach to help me improve the company culture. And it's been amazing. When you have the right people with the right mission working on your business or your company, I mean, the sky is the limit. People are happy. People want to come to work. They work hard. And so it's just been a night and day difference. So that's been one of my biggest lessons from Mark is really take care to build a great company culture and take care of your people, both in compensation, but also work culture wise. And, your company will thrive.
In hiring a business coach, what did you look for?
Oh yeah, the business coach has been absolutely game changing for me. So that happened about 5 years ago, I want to say. Yeah, approximately 5 years ago. And when I was hiring the business coach, I looked for a couple of things. One, I actually brought a specific problem in the company related to company culture that I needed help solving. So that was, what are your ideas to do that? And then two, I looked for someone who had an experience of, you know, being a CEO previously and a lot of management experience. And it was kind of what we went back to about learning from someone else's experience, because wow, working with him as my business coach and chief of staff now for 5 years, there are so many things that he sees before me that could be problems that we get out of the way, that we fix, that we solve throughout in the company. Because he served as CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation for 20 years or 30 years, and so learning from his experience has been incredible. The other thing I would say about that's great about a business coach or mentor, whether it's Mark Cuban or my coach, is they teach you how to manage. And, people can be great entrepreneurs. You can be a great writer. You can be a great podcaster. You can be a great whatever skill set you want to choose. But being a great manager is usually not a natural ability for most people. And it's a skill that you need to develop. And one of the best ways to develop that is by learning from other great managers who have done it for a long time. And usually they've learned the hard way on how to become a great manager. So hopefully you don't have to do that.
What other sorts of skills did you put together for your board of directors?
Yeah. So experience management. Another skill that I think is really, really important is understanding company dynamics. So it's kind of a broad term, but what I mean by that is we're very careful with how and when we hire, fire, change company policies because we have to think about the broader scope of the company, the impact that it's going to have on the other employees, the impact that it's going to have on the tutors, the impact that it's going to have on the students, the impact that it's going to have on the marketing teams. And so that's a very nuanced approach. Whereas a lot of startups, I think, they try to make decisions very fast and even haphazardly. And I'd say that's how we used to operate. And it would really throw off the ability for certain stakeholders, ones that I just mentioned, to fully comprehend what was going on, to fully adapt to it. And sometimes, there would be resentment, or, as I mentioned, it would cause for poor company culture. So I think understanding the nuances of company dynamics in a very, very sophisticated way is really, really important for any board of directors. And that's why you really need a board of directors, especially when you get to a certain size.
Now, in recent years, going back to the SAT, some schools dropped the SAT, then they reinstated it. What's going on with that as one of the integral pieces of a college application?
Yeah, so what was really interesting is in 2020, when the COVID pandemic hit, many colleges went test optional during that time because, well, students weren't able to take the SAT or the ACT because they couldn't be in a room that was large enough to be 6 feet apart, et cetera. So they made it optional. Now, since then, many colleges have carried that policy over to stay test optional. However, I would encourage any parent or student listening to still take the SAT or the ACT for a few reasons. One is there's been a lot of data that shows that students who have test scores are given an admissions advantage, even at colleges that are test optional. Sometimes that admissions advantage is as high as 2 to 3 times higher
Wow.
acceptance rates. Yeah, it's kind of unfair when they say they're test optional, but actually the students getting in, if you look at the data at many top universities, is showing an advantage to the students who have test scores. Then two, there are billions of dollars in college merit-based scholarships out there, so full tuition, half tuition scholarships that still consider test scores, even if the admissions part of the college doesn't, the
Mhm.
financial aid does. So, unless your parents are super wealthy and they're going to pay all of your college, it's unlikely that you will not want to take these tests because it can help you secure a lot of merit-based financial aid. But the third and the biggest reason is many colleges, there's been a huge trend, especially this year in 2024, of bringing back the test scores. So places like Harvard, Yale, MIT, Brown, Dartmouth, University of Texas at Austin, Georgetown. I mean, the list goes on and on, dozens and dozens. Seems like every couple of weeks there's a new university reinstating test score requirements. And one of the reasons that this is happening is the universities have seen the data of, the both the opportunities and the outcomes of going test optional and intuitive, and it's not good, meaning that it's actually giving more opportunity for wealthier students to get into universities. And it seems counterintuitive, right? You would think if you get rid of test scores, um, it would be more fair to low income, rural, and urban population students. But the opposite is true because typically when you get rid of test scores, you're going to value extracurricular activities more. And who can have the best extracurricular activities like volunteering overseas, starting nonprofits, doing sports like water polo and golf, etc. So usually it's even the wealthiest. They've noticed, and the data's out there. You can look at studies by Yale, Dartmouth, all these universities that have reinstated the test scores, that removing test scores actually hurt low income and poor applicants the most, which was very counterintuitive to what
Hmm.
everyone thought was going to happen. So that's one of the major drivers. The other driver is it's producing, worse outcomes for the actual universities in terms of attracting the right students. Because if you think about a university like Harvard that gets 50,000 applications plus for 2,000 seats, roughly 1,500 seats, if you don't have a test score to go through those applicants, and half of all high school seniors in 2024 have an A average, and probably for Harvard, it's 80 to 70 to 80% of all applicants have an A average. How do you really differentiate? I mean, then you're using extracurricular activities again, which I just talked about the problem with that. So it's very, very difficult. And so we're seeing a huge trend back towards reinstating test scores. So anyone listening, there's just so many reasons you should still be taking these exams.
College has gotten so expensive. Is it for everyone? Who should be going and who shouldn't? What goes into that kind of decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. I no one can be more upset than me about the cost of college. It's so important. And there's social media influencers and financial people, or finance influencers, I should say, that say college is no longer important. You can become a YouTuber, you can be a social media influencer. But all of the actual raw data out there um, shows that having a college education increases your earning potential significantly. I think the average is about $1.2 million in additional earnings over your lifetime. In addition, um, the unemployment rate is about half for college graduates versus high school graduates. For high school graduates, it's about 4%. For college graduates, about 2%. Median weekly earnings is higher. every data statistic, you can look at the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics on all of this, shows that having a college education increases your earning potential. Now, it is a financial investment in terms of how much should you spend on college. So I used to advocate when I started this 13 years ago that you should go to the best college possible. Now I advocate that you should go to the best college that's financially feasible. And what do I mean by that? If you get into Harvard, but Harvard doesn't give you any scholarships or financial aid package, you'd be on the hook for 300 to $400,000 of student debt after you're paying housing costs and all that. But if you get into a great state school and the tuition is $20,000 a year, and they also give you a half tuition scholarship, so now you're down to $10,000 a year. I would say go to the great state school. At least you're still getting a great education, getting a college degree, which is very, very important, but you're not sinking yourself into financial debt for the rest of your life. And so that's the way that I would approach it for parents and students is try to reduce your cost of college by selecting, a great college at a reasonable cost, but also if you can get merit-based scholarships and financial aid, that can significantly reduce your costs. As I mentioned, I got $500,000 myself. Quarter million was a full tuition scholarship. And then I got another 100,000 to pay for housing, books, food. And this is a trend for many students who are high achieving. And that's what I try to help students do is win these scholarships so that they can lower their cost of college. And then, of course, the college education makes sense when it's not that expensive.
What sort of advice would you give to kids starting out today in terms of getting a basic college education, as you were saying, a cost effective education, and parlaying that into whatever their dreams might be?
Yeah, so my advice would be actually not to follow your passion, but to follow your effort. And that's very counterintuitive to most of the rhetoric that's out there. So, I could be passionate about painting or passionate about playing basketball, but I will never be an NBA basketball player. And so, what I think you should really cultivate is becoming really, really good at something and that could be writing, that could be um, math, that could be science. And usually, how do you become really good at something? Usually, you have to put in lots of hours of effort. Malcolm Gladwell says 10,000 hours of effort. But once you become really, really good at something, you differentiate yourself from the marketplace of people, which makes you a highly valuable um, commodity in the workplace. And so then you can go out and pursue a career in your field of interest that you are highly skilled at. And so it takes a lot of work and effort, but typically you will find something that you are good at. Everyone is good at something, and you just need to put in a lot of usually the two go hand in hand. Whatever you're putting effort in and whatever you're working hard at, you become good at. And so that's what you need to figure out. And you have high school, you have college, and you have post college to do that. So it's not like it needs to be done overnight.
And I think too, with your first job, out of college, out of grad school, or whatever, um, to some extent, you just have to do what you are told to do. Put in a lot of very
Yeah.
long hours and just develop the skills in the workplace that will eventually propel you in the direction you want to go. And I think that everybody does that differently because everybody has different skills and abilities. But I think it can also be discouraging. What sort of words of encouragement do you give to kids getting out of school, maybe with a lot of debt, with certainly with some debt these days, it seems? What words of encouragement do you give them when they find themselves in that workaday slog, which for some of us is like 90 hours a week?
Yeah. I would say it's not forever, it's just for now. And I think that's really important to remember because when you're in the thick of working like that, it can seem like it's never ending and it's never going to get better. And if you believe that, it's super discouraging. I've been through medical school working 80 hours a week, doing surgery rotations with 36-hour shifts. And when I was in the thick of that, I was like, this is horrible. I do not want to do this. How am I going to get through this, etc. But eventually I became a dermatologist and now I do some teledermatology part-time, and it's totally great. I'm so happy I went through medical school. I was able to still become a doctor. I'm able to do it with my entrepreneurship. I was able to find an amazing balance. But if you talked to me when I was doing my 36-hour trauma surgery shift at LA County Hospital, I would have said, how is this ever gonna happen? You know? So what I would tell young people is work hard, work really, really hard, do what you need to do, put in the effort, put in the hours, put in the grind, and it gets better. It gets better. Talking from the other side to give you guys some inspiration and encouragement, it gets so much better. And now I'm living my dream life and dream career as a doctor and entrepreneur, and that happens for so many people. But it's usually for the people who grinded it out in the beginning. You either grind it out in the beginning or grind it out the end. And it's better in the beginning because you're young, you're youthful, you have energy. Otherwise, you'd be grinding your whole life.